Morning, welcome to today's session. Just allow a moment for everybody to arrive. But welcome to those who've already joined. Welcome. We're just allowing everybody to join the session. And then I will begin. Okay. So, welcome everybody. My name's Rachel Reed. I'm Director of Insight here at ETOA. Very much looking forward to hearing from Alexander Göransson of Euromonitor today. Welcome to you, Alexander.
Thank you.
Some of you may have attended his webinar earlier this year on luxury travel, so we're delighted to have you back. Today, you're going to be talking about the outlook for European inbound tourism in 2025. So we will move over to that very shortly. Just a couple of housekeeping points. We will be sending the webinar out. So that'll be probably tomorrow. So we'll send you the recording. It will also be up on our Insight Hub. So please feel free to also ask questions in the Q&A. Which is open for you. And without further ado, I will hand over to Alexander.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. So, yeah, good. Pleased to be here. And I said pleased to be back as well, because I think it's the third time now I've been presenting for ETOA in the past 12 months. But for those of you who are not familiar with Euromonitor International, who I represent, so we're a global business intelligence provider with offices now in 16 markets, and we cover a comprehensive range of industries, of which we've got just over 50 years of experience. I've been with the company for 20, and it was during those years that I found travel, which is one of the focus areas and one of the many industries that we cover. But what I am going to talk you through today, so the main feature of this webinar and how it's been built is to look at our forecast for flows, so number of people traveling between 2025 and 2030. I'm aligning the focus of this webinar with ETOA's focus as well, which is going to be inbound arrivals to Europe from outside of Eastern and Western Europe. I will then be looking at the traveller type, the cultural explorer, and actually the cultural explorer will then be a theme which will sort of run through the remaining sections of the presentation, which is going to be the immersive travel trend, and then we'll have a quick look at the penetration for package holidays before rounding off with some final thoughts about flows and cultural explorers. So firstly, the flows forecast, and as I mentioned, the first section we're looking now at total arrivals, and then we'll go a bit deeper onto arrivals from outside of Europe. So this is our forecast you can see on screen. So this is going to be the total number of arrivals to Europe between 2025 and 2030. We're expecting a slow but steady increase, and that's going to have a higher level of arrivals from outside of Europe. And here we can see the difference between volume and value growth. So we are forecasting in 2030 just over 120 million additional trips, of which the rest of the world will account for 24%. In value terms, we're going to have an additional value of 140 billion, where around about 25% of the growth is going to be from the rest of the world. As you can see, rest of the world trips have a higher value spend in Europe because they tend to have fewer visits to friends and relatives, but also longer stays in destination. And I thought it would be interesting on this occasion to pull which markets receive the most arrivals from outside of Europe. So I put together these what I call actually licorice all sort bars here, but for those of you familiar with those sweets. But as you can see here, France is the country which at the moment has the highest exposure to arrivals from outside of Europe. It also has the highest exposure from the Asia Pacific as well. So we've got a total roughly 22 to 23 million inbound trips. It's then followed by the UK, where the UK differs from France, apart from being lower, is that it has a much higher exposure. The largest single group there is arrivals from North America. And actually, it's interesting as well when we look at Italy right at the other end of this chart, because Italy, after the UK, is the most exposed to North America and has the highest proportion of visitors from North America as well. Portugal, I cut it here at the sixth largest because after Portugal, with about 10 million trips, well, actually not Portugal, after Italy, which is sort of 7 or 8, it's then quite a large drop to the number 7. But actually, Portugal, as we can see, is higher than both Germany and Italy, but also has a more, shall we say, balanced actually in terms of where the arrivals come from. Spain, and again, I think a lot of this also there are issues of historical ties. Spain has the largest proportion of visitors from Latin America, for example. So now we're going to look at the forecast for inbound to Europe. But first, just a quick snapshot of what we're expecting to be the global growth in the number of trips, so looking at all regions. So the chart shows, I mean, you can see first the bars, which are the largest regions for outbound trips, and that's actually Western Europe. I should say that in Western Europe, we kind of cheat a lot because we have a lot of small countries in Europe compared to, well, especially North America. It's just 2 countries, for example, so that's why it's a bit exaggerated. You can also see the blue sections at the top is going to be the absolute growth. And here you can also see that the Asia Pacific is going to be the most dynamic, with in the region of 150 million additional trips. They're additional trips which, for example, could potentially travel to Europe. And we'll look, I think, a bit in the next slide at where the growth opportunities come from. So I think this exemplifies it better. But I just actually want to mention just one quick point on the previous slide. So we're forecasting 1.9 billion outbound trips by 2030. I presented a similar slide on this last year, and I can say that the rate of growth for, if we want to do a like-to-like period, 25 to 29, is broadly the same as last year. It's actually weaker growth in Europe than we predicted last year, but that's made up for by it's actually stronger growth in the Asia Pacific and about the same in the other regions. But just going back, so as you can see here, Asia Pacific is going to be by far the largest contributor to trips growth. 45% of additional trips are going to come from the Asia Pacific region. Now, I think you probably guessed that already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to alter the chart a bit. I'm going to take out our region, Western Europe and Asia Pacific. Now, actually, it highlights better, I think, which are some of the more surprises to me. So Eastern Europe, last year I had a dedicated slide on that. This year I'm just going to point out that actually Eastern Europe, there's a lot of potential there. 12% of all global trip growth is actually going to come from Eastern Europe. And that is on a par with the Middle East and Africa. And also, it is more than the growth we're going to get from North America, which for many European markets is one of the leading source markets. Now, I think if you start mentioning North America, you can't not mention the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump. There's been a lot of talk there about trade wars, which did cause some market jitters in the spring. But actually, we are not seeing any sort of major shifts in travel patterns on the back of that, except possibly from Canada to the US. But as we can see as well, arrivals to Europe from North America, we are still forecasting a steady growth over the forecast period. And on this slide, I'm scoping out where the new opportunities lie for travel into Europe over the next 5 years. I've therefore purposely taken out European source markets from this bubble chart. So here we are looking first at how many more people are going to be traveling to anywhere in the world. So to walk you through the chart, I should say I really love bubble charts, but anyway, just to walk you through. So on the horizontal axis, you've got the total number of trips in 2025 to the rest of the world. So we've got China leads away there with 30, just under 33 million, I think it is. The US comes in about 29, 30. Now, I've also then looked at the bubble size, and the bubble size that shows the proportion of these outbound trips that we estimate will be going to Western Europe. And here you can see, for example, that although the US bubble is actually bigger than the Chinese one, even if the Chinese bubble is sort of showing more growth in numbers. So this indicates, for example, that yes, more people are going from China, but not so many of them are going to choose Europe. So there's potential there, but there's also competition from other countries in the region. If we then look at it from a vertical perspective, the vertical perspective is going to be the value growth. So here we've got India, which I know is, when I speak to people in the tourism industry in Europe, very much a focus. India, what's the potential? It's seen as, dare I say, the new China, the next big growth market. And indeed, India, we're forecasting to grow by 11%. What's also interesting is that it has a much higher proportion of residents based in India who will be traveling to Europe. Similarly, we've got another market here, which this year I'm beginning to see is the one that's trending and popping up more on the horizon as a source market. You've got Vietnam, where we're forecasting 12% growth. And there's also potential 11 million additional trips to play for, which is more than, for example, established markets like South Korea, Australia, and Brazil. But as we can see, it's going to be a very low proportion of the Vietnamese, so therefore it's got a smaller globe ball, which a smaller bubble, which will be traveling to Europe. And again, I would anticipate that because, again, it's a country with a lower GDP, you're going to have a lower level of affordability, but perhaps in the longer term, it's a country to look out for, perhaps converting these trips as and when the Vietnamese consumer gets wealthier to come to Europe. But one that surprised me is South Korea. So we're now in the bottom left corner, because you see this is a country with a strong economy, disposable incomes, but it's only going to be doing another 6 or 7 million additional outbound trips, which is less than, for example, Vietnam. It's also got a relatively small proportion of those who will be traveling to Western Europe, and it's only going to show 4% growth. Whilst at the same time, actually, if we look at the whole cluster here towards the left of the screen, we've got Australia, Brazil. These are markets where they're not going to be contributing much to additional trips, but on the other hand, they do travel to Europe. And then we've got the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaya, who, again, not so much travel to Europe, not so much contributors, but they're growing. They kind of sit in between. And I should just say that the way we make these forecasts, we base our historic data on UN tourism, and then we model it forward using an econometric model with a whole long range of parameters: trade, disposable income, GDP growth, industrial output, etc., oil prices, exchange rates, which we then build together to make these forecasts. And we've also conducted surveys at Euromonitor. So this is a survey we did in February, where we've been looking at sort of which countries planning on increasing their spending. Again, I think it's very noteworthy. We saw that India and China were to be growing very quickly. And indeed, with them, we've got over 40% of respondents, that's the orange section here, who are saying that they plan to increase their spending. They've also got the ones who are saying that they intend to, the fewest who have responded to say that they intend to reduce their spending as well. So I think if we look at this of all the countries surveyed here, we've got quite a healthy outlook for continued spending on travel, which is, again, here in Europe, but globally, it is seen as a priority area for consumers to spend on, even if in some markets, like the UK, for example, consumer spending and the economy, there are signs of people tightening their belts, but travel still remains strong in a global perspective. So I'm just going to take a quick breather, and then I'm going to move on to the cultural explorer. And that's a traveler type that I've chosen because, well, two reasons. The first is that I shared with you luxury travelers this summer, but cultural explorers, I think, are an interesting match for Europe because, for example, if you're looking at the leisure seeker, sun, sea, and sand, that can perhaps easily be done in the home region. But when you come to Europe, there is a lot of the motivation. This is a region with a great heritage and culture, and that people will want to experience that. So we're looking at the consumer segment, looking for culture. And as I just mentioned, we at Euromonitor have identified using our questionnaires 8 different traveler types, of which the cultural explorer is one of them. So what is a cultural explorer? So we've defined them along the lines of people who have answered yes to the following questions. They are consumers who say that it's important for them to experience cultures other than their own, and it's important that the travel destination features art or heritage or opportunities to immerse oneself in the local culture. So firstly, looking a bit more about who these cultural explorers are. They are in total, looking at the global population, round about 15 to 16% of all travellers. This, of course, as we'll see later on, varies significantly by country. There is a skew towards the more mature tourist here. So the 60 plus are the largest age group for cultural explorers. But I think the actual difference across ages isn't that great. But yes, it is there to an extent for the 60 plus. And which countries have we identified as having the most cultural explorers? Now, easily here I can see that China is the outlier with 30% identified as cultural explorers. That's why I've highlighted it in yellow. There's then quite a leap to 20% for South Korea. Vietnam is a country which I can see could be in the longer term a potential source market for Europe. Brazil has a high share of cultural explorers already, and cultural explorers, and also a high penetration for trips to Europe. Finally, at the bottom end, and it's perhaps a bit unfair, we've got the US last. I think one of the reasons for the US is when I've looked at the US data, it's a very diverse society there, and consequently it has a more should we say, balanced shift between all the other different traveller types we've got. So we've got eco-adventurers, adventure lovers, where again, there are opportunities for that in Europe. Also, the high on blended travellers, for example. I noticed they weren't particularly big on luxury, but again, it just goes back to the US market being just very balanced in terms of traveller type. So moving on to immersion through travel, which is again what cultural explorers are seeking to do. So what I mean by immersion here is it's not just that you passively go to a destination, stay in the resort, do the things you do at home, except for the fact that the weather is nicer. Instead, this is going to be like either you go to a city, learn the history, go on a guided tour, find out of its heritage, you go and try the local cuisine, eat out in restaurants, explore and do something you wouldn't have done before. Also, what we've seen, and I mean, last year, one of the buzzwords was Swiftonomics in terms of people whose travel is driven very much by the fact that they want to go to concerts, festivals, and cultural events. And equally, sport has been a major driver as well. I'm using an example here of the Women's Rugby Cup that was held this year in the UK, for example, so people traveling to see sporting events in destination. So all of this is some form or another of immersive travel. And looking at sort of the importance or the desire for immersive travel and how that can impact on the preference for a destination. So again, going back to our surveys, we have asked people, how many people have a key preference for, and these are multiple choice questions, but how many have ticked sort of cultural immersion when choosing a destination? You can see for all travelers, it's around about 10%, whereas for people who've identified themselves, we've identified as cultural explorers, it's closer to 45%. The choice of culture, if you're choosing between two destinations, is very important. What's interesting, and I'm noticing this actually as a trend throughout, is that we ask the same question, but rephrased, people's willingness to pay more. And yes, there is a clear preference to pay more for cultural explorers, but it's not so pronounced as the actual destination preference. And similarly, we've got the preference for arts and heritage. There's obviously a rich range of museums, historical sites you can go to visit. Again, 45% of cultural explorers express this presence, whereas a bit more, just over 20%, cite this as something that they would be willing to pay more for. And again, this aligns with the categories which are fastest growing. So at Euromonitor, we track a comprehensive range of categories. It's a sort of global level. So this is for Western Europe as a destination. And we've looked at the top 10 fastest growing categories. And I've indicated here which ones are related to immersive tourism. Now, airlines we've got at the fastest growing at 7%. That's again to do with, and we're looking at the people are flying further, and also airlines have been successful in raising their fares, so it's growing quickly. Cruises is a rapidly rising sector, but from a low base. But then after that, what do we find? Again, amongst the fastest growing categories are guided tours, followed by festivals and leisure events. After luxury hotels, we've got museums and cultural sites growing at 5% every year. Maybe it's more into commercial tourism now than particularly cultural exploration, but even spas and theme parks, very, very what call it immersion sort of activities, they are again growing at over 5%. So there is a lot of potential growth for, and indeed we are seeing that those are going to be the key growth areas for tourism in Western Europe over the next 5 years. And finally, I'm doing a little snapshot on the package holiday presentation. I'm aware that a lot of you who've joined today are involved in the group tour and group travel space. Euromonitor, we don't actually break out the value of group tours, but we do look at the penetration of packages, and I'm going to look at this in the context of the cultural explorer traveler type as well. So again, I've excluded any markets here in Europe, and I have pulled the largest markets for in total for travel and package holidays. So the horizontal axis here is showing now the total market size of package holidays. Our package holiday definition, I should say, at Euromonitor is quite wide because we include both the traditional packages where it's all, we're going to go on such a date to such and such a place, but also the dynamic ones like you get on Expedia, for example. You sort of select your own hotel and transport. But what we can see here is that the US is the largest market with 42, 43 billion US dollars in sales, followed by China. That may perhaps not come to so much of a surprise. When we then look at where the growth is, that again is done by the size of the bubble. So we can see that China, the number of package holiday trips is going to be rising faster in China than in the US. And also India is going to be rising very rapidly as well. Now, if we then look at the vertical axis, and here there's a bit of shall we say, flaw maybe in the way I've pulled the data, because if you have a look now, we've got Japan is the highest, and the height of the chart shows the proportion of package holidays of total spending. And as you can see, Japan comes in at 101%. Now, what I did was that I calculated this from a European perspective, where a package holiday almost always goes abroad. So I took the sales of total package holidays divided by the total outbound leisure spending. And Japan, and I've discussed it with our office in Tokyo, they have a very high proportion of package holidays there. So that's why it distorts with a very high value for Japan, but I decided to leave it in anyway for transparency. So please ignore that ball for Japan. But I think it's interesting actually to look at, and these are the percentage numbers you're seeing as well, just which countries have a very high penetration of package holidays. It's high in China, it's high in India, it's much smaller in South Korea, Australia. Vietnam, which, as I mentioned, I see trending and is very low. Philippines, I also mentioned, was trending last year. Again, they have very low package holiday penetrations. So now the big question, the cultural explorer, to what extent are they likely to go for a package holiday? And actually, perhaps not what you want to hear, but we can see that they are less likely. Now, up to a point, I'm not surprised. I'm totally not surprised that an all-inclusive is something that they would be less likely to go for, because again, the whole idea is to go to the country, explore the cultural sites. So hanging around an all-inclusive resort is going to be an anathema to this segment. But I am genuinely surprised that they were not actually overrepresented in group tours, because I would have thought that would be an opportunity. You might need some kind of a curation of your cultural exploration to sort of be shown around to see what there is to go and visit and what you didn't know and find that out in the country. So I thought I had one more slide on this, but anyway, rounding up now for my final thoughts. So we've been looking at sort of total arrivals to Europe. We've then been looking at the cultural explorer. So what I've done is I've mashed together those two themes now, and I've identified 5 different inbound markets to look out for over the forecast period. And so each bar shows the total number of outbound trips to the overall world we are going to be seeing at present, and then the blue bit is the additional growth over the next 5 years. So as you can see, the US, it still is a very major market. It's also going to be showing growth. It's going to be adding around about 15 million additional trips. That is, however, dwarfed, those 15 million additional trips, by China with around about 35 million additional trips, and also India is coming along strong as well as a contributor in actual value terms. Vietnam is going to be growing very quickly percentage-wise. And then we've got South Korea, which is not going to be generating much growth, but I think it's still interesting to look at, because if we now overlay where the potential growth in trips is going to come from with the cultural explorer, so that the percentage which are cultural explorers are the orange balls. And you can see here, actually, China again is going to be very much a growth market, contributor to growth. But it's also, and that's significant for Europe, I think it has a very high proportion of cultural explorers. The UK, the US will be growing, but not so many cultural explorers there. India, again, has a slightly lower penetration of cultural explorers again, but will be growing. But then we've got Vietnam and South Korea. So Vietnam, a lot of percentage growth. South Korea, not much growth, but if it can be got to grow, both those markets actually have above average penetrations of cultural explorers, Vietnam and South Korea. So, and that leads me on to, I think, what I would say is going to leave you with perhaps more of a rhetorical question, and that is, as we can see, there is a combination here of markets that are growing, but at the same, and these markets also, they're not necessarily coming to Europe, but at the same time they have a lot of cultural explorers. So the question is, and how can Europe make itself more attractive and leverage the growth from East Asian source markets? So thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting. Rachel will avail my presentation, and there's also going to be a Q&A. And in addition, I'm always happy to discuss travel with industry experts. So feel free to reach out to me either here directly by email or LinkedIn, or right now in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Really lots of food for thought there. Yes, as Alexander says, do please type any questions in the Q&A if you would like to ask anything specific. We have about 10 more minutes, so we can cover some things off. I wanted to ask you something, Alexander, about going back to the beginning of your presentation. I think it looks like a really healthy picture for Europe, particularly for long haul. And I took from that we'll see increased arrivals over the next 5 years, which is great, and people spending more money, which again looks great. But my question was actually prompted by something you said later, which is that flights and accommodation have gone up. So is the increased spend driven by that, or are they spending more in destinational activities and shopping and etc.?
Well, I actually got that query from a client because they were comparing growth rate. They're obviously looking now at Europe as a source. And indeed, certainly the UK, why the UK was growing faster in this case, the question was, in Germany was actually a greater spending on flights. And as we saw earlier, we travel a lot more long haul as well. I think when it comes to hotels, because it seems hotels sort of shot up very quickly after COVID, they are beginning to flatten now. I should caveat here and say that's for Europe, because that's where I've been tracking that. But I think now the growth is on flights. But looping back to the thing with the comparison within Europe was that if one stripped out the flights, then actually the growth was more sort of aligned with the average. So yeah, it's the flights, you're right.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I mean, I think, we've spoken a lot recently about, the recovery of the Asia Pacific market. Just a note to the listeners, if you are interested in looking at this a bit more, please join one of our Origin Market Insight sessions, which are specifically for, well, we've got India, China, Japan, and also North America, but we have got a lot of things on Asia. So, we have covered that in some more detail.
And if I may just cut in, Rachel, as I mentioned, I mean, the Asia Pacific, we're actually forecasting a stronger forecast now from that region this year than we did this time last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great to point that out. Thank you. I did see there as well, some of the Asian markets, though, they're planning to spend less in the next 12 months, even though they're planning to come still. Is that the case in a few of the markets?
So I didn't catch the beginning of the question.
Oh, I was saying I had seen that some of the Asian markets, when they were talking about what do you plan to do in terms of spend, increase, decrease, or stay the same. And I think some of the Asian markets were planning to decrease their spend in the next 12 months or so.
Well, there are people decreasing, but I don't think it's decreased relative to last year. So
yeah, I think it was some of the smaller ones. I mean,
yeah.
certainly the big drivers, absolutely the increase in spend, which I think is really encouraging for us to see. Just thinking about those charts that you had there, Alexander, I did notice Australasia it looked like it was a really small growth, and obviously I know it was a small bar anyway, but is it the case that we're going to see less growth coming from there?
It looks that way based on our data, yes.
Yeah. Any further insights as to
I'm not super familiar with sort of why they're not traveling again. It's just a smaller population down there, so it's less of a growth potential.
Mm.
Then again, of course, if they do come, of course, they will be higher value visitors because they stay longer in destination. But then
Yes.
again, I mean, I know as well when you're trying to sort of calculate overall spending, a much higher proportion there again is going to be the actual cost of traveling. Because you've
Yes.
easily spent $1,000 just getting from Australia to here. So
Yes. Absolutely. And I wondered, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, Alexander, or not, but on your licorice all sorts bars,
yeah.
where you were showing the top 6 European markets and broken down by where the origin markets were. You said there was a big drop to number 7. I just wondered who the best of the rest was. Who was the number 7 after Italy?
Good question. I can't remember now. I think Switzerland kind of came along. They're quite high.
Yeah, well, I was interested actually if it was Switzerland because, we know that traditionally that is popular with Indian and Chinese visitors. And if we're
Absolutely.
seeing an increase from India and China, it may be that the gap might be closed a bit. If you do this again next year, maybe it will be a smaller gap.
Yeah, I'll think of that. So
Yeah, thank you. So as I say, do please type any questions you've got for Alexander specifically, and if you want to ask them, I've got the Q&A open so I can see them. I wanted to ask as well, Alexander, about the cultural explorers. I thought that was a really interesting segment, and I don't know if you have insight in this, but of course there's a growing market in more adventurous cultural experiences. Obviously, you've got people who still want to go to the Louvre and the Rijksmuseum and see all the big monuments, etc. I wondered if there was any differentiation in these people as to are they adventurous? Are they willing to go to a newer museum or something like that? Or is it strictly the Tower of London, those sorts of things?
I would say that people are more adventurous. You've also got increasingly more people traveling means more repeat visits as well. And if you come back the second time, you're going to want to see something more. I think also a lot of this is generational, and this is more anecdotal from when I've been traveling. That, for example, you will go to a big city, let's say Rome, you see a group tour that of people from East Asia, they all tend to be in the sort of 50 or even 60 plus demographic, whereas young people are going from that region are sort of going around on their own. And the
Yes.
group tour is, of course, more likely to take you to all the classic sites. Mm.
Yes, yes. Actually, I just wanted to clarify that as well, because when you were showing about the package travels, that could be an FIT package, couldn't it? It's not necessarily a group tour.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't do group tours as a product group at whole. It's interesting because it's a very difficult area to quantify.
Well, we have this discussion a lot, Alexander.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line on a group?
Yeah, exactly. And if it's a group of friends going together, but sort of somebody actually organizing a group tour.
Yes, or well, in fact, extended family groups as well. You know,
Yeah.
we see.
And again, I mean, if you see extended family group is, well, India, for example, I discussed last year, that is going to be very important. But I mean, I would, and I mean, another area is a group of people with a common interest. So you would have an local fine arts society might hire a minibus to go touring somewhere and look at paintings. But I mean, I think you would have to draw the line on somebody commercially for profit organizing a group tour and retailing it, as it were, as opposed to doing it bespoke for people.
Yes, yes, I think so. And I suppose I had one more question. It's kind of a minor point, but we were talking about these you know, experiences that people want to have, and you had your immersive growth categories chart, and you know, with the coloured bars for which were the immersive ones. And I noticed that food and dining wasn't considered
Yeah,
sort of immersive, and I think, you know, there is a demand for these sort of culinary experiences and culinary tours. Where would they sit in that chart?
I agree. And it's also, if you look back at that chart, it's probably a matter of definition as well. I was actually toying with colouring that chart as well, but I didn't because ultimately people do need to eat. So it would include perhaps a lot of people who just go to McDonald's, I was about to say. But yes, I mean, you know, if we know, I've seen now, for example, Airbnb are pushing on experiences and then saying, oh, you know, you can rent an Airbnb and now go for a cheese tasting in France or a wine tasting in Spain, for example. So certainly that's an immersive experience, and especially if you're going one level beyond purely serving people to restaurants, maybe show them how the food is made, or maybe even you have a chef and you together with him make it, for example. So yeah, definitely that is a potential growth area. And I think altogether, this is not just a travel trend. People are getting, I think, more adventurous with their cuisine as well.
Yes, yes,
But
absolutely.
I should say that I'm now talking very much from a European perspective, because if you're looking at inbound visitors from Asia, they might have, should we say, more dietary preferences or religious and cultural things. So that's one thing you do need to be aware of.
Yes. Absolutely. Right. So I've got no further questions. So last chance if you want to type one in. But I'll come to you then, Alexander, just for any final thoughts on this this work that you've done, any your big takeaway, or what you think we might see.
I think that what we're going to see, we're definitely going to see continued onward growth. And as I said, the traditional source markets, the US, are still growing. I try to sort of focus on more the sort of new up and coming areas. Uh, I mean, China is perhaps not necessarily a new market. India is perhaps the next new one. But if we think beyond that, I think the challenge will be there are cultural explorers in countries like South Korea, Vietnam, two very diverse Asian countries. But again, what can one do to sort of seek out that segment, which I think is a good match for Europe, and attract them to come? And indeed, any sort of traveller type from there to Europe. That's my
Absolutely.
final
Well, I
thought.
think
I might not
that's
have the answer, but it's my
no, I think we've some work ahead for the next 5 years then in
yeah.
that case. Okay, I think we will wrap up there, as there are no further questions. A reminder that this will be put on the Insight Hub, etoa.org/insight. Euromonitor do have their own channel on there as our partner, so you can find other of Alexander's webinars and previous reports as well. So check that out. Otherwise, thank you so much, Alexander.
Thank you again. Thanks to everybody who joined as well.
Exactly. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.